Welcome to Ashley On, your one-stop podcast where we talk about health and wellness, spirituality, and all things new. Stick around as we delve deep into innovations to support a better world.
Welcome to the show. Today's show is with Kristine Ely, a PhD student at Virginia Tech University. And Kristine has been studying the benefits and risks associated with feeding horses hemp seed oil. Any of you who are listening are familiar with the industrial hemp markets and the opportunity to use hemp stalks to replace plastics and with more sustainable solutions and building materials and develop carbon negative products that actually are removing carbon from the atmosphere. All of that's possible through the applications of hemp stalks, but the economics of growing hemp just for the stalks for those products don't work. So there's a large movement now associated with hemp seed, which ironically has been legal to consume by humans in the United States for forever. Has nothing to do with cannabinoids or cannabis or anything. It's a completely legal process. You can buy hemp seeds or hemp hearts at your local grocery store. Now there's a movement to approve the use of those products for horses and for animals. Now a lot of people would think, well, if we can eat it, why can't they? Which is a fair question, but the rules are the rules, and the research has to be done. And so Kristine Ely is one of those out there in the world doing the research, doing the hard work to try to help build this industry. So it's a great program. I hope you enjoy the show today with Kristine Ely, PhD candidate from Virginia Tech, focused on hemp seed oil for horses as feed.
As always, this show is brought to you by packedwithlife.com, your source for functional mushrooms. Lots of great information there and links to awesome products that support natural healing, new neuron growth in your brain. Think about that for a second. Growing new neurons, probably a pretty important thing to do. Lowers inflammation and provides natural energy without caffeine. Just so many benefits to functional mushrooms like lion's mane, cordyceps, chaga, turkey tail, those sorts of functional mushrooms. So check it out now at packedwithlife.com. Hello, Kristine Ely. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining today.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, awesome. I'm very excited to talk to you. Your work with horses and with hemp seed as feed is fascinating to me and to probably any of the listeners who are familiar with the industrial hemp market and kind of some catalyst actions that kind of need to happen in order for that future and alternative, production capabilities that are more sustainable and all the kind of potential benefits that hemp represents. A lot of it comes back to some basic blocking and tackling, and what you're doing with feeding hemp to horses is really important. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then let's talk about your work.
Well, fabulous. Well, I think probably the most exciting thing is I just recently completed my PhD in equine nutrition.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very excited. It's been a long time coming, so I'm excited to be on the other side of things and kind of move forward and see where life takes me. Of course, we're going to talk about my dissertation work, which is, part of the whole reason we're here today. But I'm moving forward in a postdoctoral research position. Obviously, I'm pretty passionate about horses and taking care of them. I have two of my own. They kind of have inspired a lot. They were off-the-track thoroughbreds. And unfortunately, they were the off-the-track thoroughbreds that weren't going to find a super useful sport home. So when they retired from research, I decided to take them under my wing and give them a soft spot to land for everything they did for me and for all the horses. So.
Well, thank you. Humans, we've been eating hemp for thousands of years, right? And it's been legal in the United States, even though a lot of people don't even realize it. But you can go to any, Kroger or Whole Foods or, any supermarket pretty much and find hemp hearts to eat legally. And it has nothing to do with CBD, nothing to do with cannabis legalization or anything like that. And they've been around forever. Are we talking about the same thing now, just trying to get it, to be legal, quote unquote, to feed to horses, even though we can eat it?
So yes, I'm glad you bring it up. It's always one of the first conversations I have with people when I try to explain my research. Is trying to designate the difference between hemp seed or hemp seed products like hemp seed oil, and then whenever they hear the word oil, a lot of times people are like, "Oh, are you feeding horses CBD and THC?" And so it's a common misnomer. But yes, so I'm interested in the nutritional aspects of the seed. And I don't know how much has been covered on the podcast in regards to this, but hemp seed does not actually produce cannabinoids. Any cannabinoids present are a contaminant during the harvesting and then processing. So yeah, I'm specifically interested in the seed oil really for the fatty acids.
Okay. What are those fatty acids? Let's talk about the details.
Yeah, so hemp seed oil is kind of unique in that it's about 80% polyunsaturated fatty acids. And those are going to be your omega-6 and omega-3s. So we hear about that a lot, right? With heart health and eat your fish to get your omega-3s, right? Being anti-inflammatory. Because that's what those fatty acids do. They regulate the inflammation response, or at least they're a part of it. They're not the only part of it, but some work back in the 70s demonstrated that increasing omega-3s was heart healthy and beneficial for the heart. So now what makes hemp interesting and unique is that it contains a special omega-6 fatty acid. And while typically we consider the omega-6 fatty acids to be inflammatory, this particular fatty acid, when supplied in the diet, leads to more of an anti-inflammatory reaction. And so that fatty acid is gamma-linolenic acid. And it's unique and special because not a lot of plant species can produce that fatty acid. They just don't contain the necessary enzymes. And so while we have things like borage oil and primrose oil that also contain it, my opinion, and I get some, encouragement from the hemp industry, is that hemp has the ability to become, commodity level production of this fatty acid. So, which makes it more attainable to introduce into the feed market.
So you're studying this in terms of the benefits of these fatty acids on horses. Has research been done? Was research done prior to this in terms of those benefits of those same fatty acids on humans? Like, how did this get approved for us before it got approved for horses?
So the struggle with hemp products being approved for humans and not your animals or livestock, this really comes down to that cannabinoid contamination factor, and the fact that humans, when they pick a product up off the shelf and know this may have a trace amount of CBD in it, they're willingly making that decision to consume that product and taking the risk upon themselves. Horses do fall under livestock. And we have to get all feedstuffs approved through APCO. And so while we don't consume horses here in the US, or dogs and cats, since they fall under that same kind of umbrella term, and the reason we don't see hemp products approved for livestock, for meat, milk, and eggs, is that the concern of humans unknowingly consuming cannabinoids. So,
but there's I thought you said earlier, there's no cannabinoids in the hemp seed, right?
It's
just confusion.
There is none produced within the seed, but so they're produced by these trichomes that the seed develops within specialized leaves covered in trichomes, and these trichomes submit or produce a sticky resin, and that's the cannabinoid. So during harvesting, that sticky resin contaminates the process, the harvesting equipment. And so it kind of transfers to the outside of the seed. And then hemp seed oil is produced by crushing and pressing those seeds. And so during processing, it can transfer to the oil. So all of the cannabinoids, there are cannabinoids that will be present at very minute levels. but they're a contaminant.
So what have you found in your research?
So I did feed horses. I top dressed their diets with about 3/4 of a cup of hemp seed oil, and it was a commercial variety, so off the shelf, so something any horse owner could potentially run into, right? It wasn't a special type of oil that we had removed all the cannabinoids. I wanted to be as realistic as possible, and my lab analyses were able to test to 50 parts per billion, a sensitivity of 50 parts per billion. And we weren't able to detect any cannabinoids at that sensitivity level.
Oh, wow. And how long what were the details of the feeding regimen?
Yeah, so the horses were on it for an entire month. So I used 6 horses, split the dose into 2 different feedings, and it was top dressed just onto a grain diet. I had no palatability issues. They consumed it, had no negative effects. And so then at the end of that month, we pulled blood. We actually pulled blood weekly, but we would have expected at the end of the month to see the greatest concentration or accumulation. However, we didn't see it at any time point.
So over the course, you're feeding the horses, you're saying 3/4 of a cup of hemp oil, basically off the shelf, hemp seed oil, I should say.
Yes, that is true.
And you're doing that twice a day, 3/4 a cup twice a day, or just once a day?
No, it is 3/4 of a cup just once a day. It was split
Okay.
into 2 servings, but
Got it.
yeah. Typically, when you're top dressing a diet for horses and you're adding like a fat supplement, you're gonna work up to about a max of 2 cups. That's about where we leave those recommendations. Those are the kind of recommendations we make when we're looking to increase energy and so gaining weight and stuff.
So that's where I wanted to go next. Like, so your first finding was after that feeding regimen, the first thing you look at is there cannabinoid contamination, as you call it, of THC or CBD or any of the cannabinoids in the blood of the horses that are eating the hemp seeds. And your conclusion after that study was it's not present at a detectable level of 50 parts per billion, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. So that should be like great news number one for anybody concerned about this, right? But what about the benefits? What did you see in terms of your measurement of what happened to the horses as a result of having these more beneficial fatty acids?
Yeah. So, the big thing was, I think one of the first things you want to address when you're comparing a fat supplement is that I made my diets. I designed them to be isocaloric in that the treatment and the control horses had calorically equivalent diets. And so after a month of supplementing this diet, none of the horses gained or lost weight. So that just indicates we were successful in that the calories I replaced with hemp seed oil were equivalent to the normal diet. So that's good, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to be supplementing a product that, and you would expect that. It's a fat supplement. You would expect it to behave like a fat. But it is still something that as a nutritionist, we have to look at. And additionally, we measured the influx of fatty acids. And so we were successfully able to increase that gamma-linolenic acid or GLA that we were interested in. So it increased the GLA. And then what we anticipated would happen is that we would increase that fatty acid, but it wouldn't increase the inflammatory fatty acid, arachidonic acid. And it didn't. And so that's exciting because this is the first study looking at hemp seed oil on horses. So we had an idea after a literature search what's going to happen, and that's what I saw happen.
So let's talk about that a little bit more. I just want to make sure I understand that last point. What were you looking for as a side effect that you were concerned about being present, but it was not present?
So our concern was we talk about these omega-6 and omega-3s for inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. And when all these diets that are fortified with omega-6 fatty acids, you're worried about them producing this arachidonic acid, which leads to inflammatory eicosanoids, right? And so the benefit of feeding something like hempseed oil that has this gamma-linolenic acid is we see an increase in the gamma-linolenic acid, but we don't see a further increase in the inflammatory arachidonic acid.
Wow. So it's not causing anything else that would be undesirable.
Yes,
is a fair way
the goal is, because most people think, well, oh, this has, more omega-6 than omega-3. And most people think that that's going to create a more inflammatory environment. But what, we're excited about is this unique fatty acid and its potential influence on the anti-inflammatory profile.
Now, were you able to study any of that, like anti-inflammatory signals that came from this diet?
I did look at cytokines, and we didn't see a lot of response, and it's not really abnormal, because we were studying them in sedentary horses. So I was not inducing any kind of inflammatory challenge. That was a bit of some budgetary and labor restrictions, unfortunately, just kind of how it goes. And so what I want to do next, I've actually submitted a USDA grant to try and answer that next piece of the question and incorporate some, whether we use exercise as a source of inflammation or potentially horses that are already suffering some level of inflammation, say arthritic horses, to see if, adding and manipulating this fatty acid profile can attenuate that inflammatory response.
So just to kind of summarize, I guess, and bring it all together, through your study, you found that the beneficial GLA fatty acid is present in the horses after they have hemp seed oil added to their diet, and you get no negative side effects of any, anti-inflammatory proteins or fatty acids being developed, and you also get no cannabinoid, THC or CBD contamination at all in the blood of the horses as a result of the work that you've done.
That's about where we're at. So, I left this study with more questions than answers, which is always, I feel like, a good result from research. Always.
No, I think it's fantastic. What you've done is laid the groundwork, right? Because I've talked to a lot of people about this topic. A lot of people just think it's silly, right? We eat hemp. Why can't horses eat hemp? We don't eat horses. I mean, I think the whole thing is just comedic, right? But you're doing the work to prove to the bureaucracy that we unfortunately have to deal with that this is safe for the horses, and you should be, applauded for that. So thank you for that work. And it sounds like your next plan is to evolve into the benefits then, right? So now that we've kind of ruled out some of the negativity that potentially could be there and it's not, so now we can look at the presence of the benefits of this hemp seed oil to horses. And I shouldn't leave out dogs as well. I think dogs is something that's you're not studying yet, but is in the list of animals that we're not consuming as humans, which would think would be the first avenue for something like this to be approved.
Yeah, and I know, and I'm not as educated or informed in the pet side of things, unfortunately, for dogs and cats, but I know that there is more work being done in that avenue, probably more from a CBD side of things that we draw off of in the horse world. But yeah, there's a lot, trying to find, it's not even just the fatty acids in the oil and hemp seed. The protein content in the seed itself is excellent. Only second to soy protein, which is kind of considered the gold standard.
Yeah, and as we're looking at alternative protein sources and solutions across the world, I'm hoping that hemp gets taken seriously in that conversation at some point.
Absolutely.
Well,
I'm also with you. I was lucky enough. I went out to a conference in Montana and made a friend who was based out of Denver, who works for a human nutrition company, and they are using hemp protein. And we met up, and she was able to gift me some blueberry muffins made with hemp protein and some pasta and some bread, and it was it was delicious and nothing what you would have expected, knowing, for your listeners who have, tried hemp or, hemp seed oil, and kind of has that really nutty aroma, kind of that, unique flavoring as well. So yeah, I think it's got a bright future.
I just had a couple other questions come up in my mind as you were talking. Like you mentioned, you're using the hemp seed oil as a top dressing for the food. Is that supplementing? Is that a normal process for those who have horses to do that, or are we introducing something new into their routine?
No, it's a normal practice. And so the benefits for that could be, you just want to add a couple ounces, and that's going to benefit skin health and, coat health. Or like I said, when you're introducing larger quantities, somewhere around 2 cups a day, the goal is to add energy or calories to the diet. So we have some of these higher performing horses where they're already eating so much, and horses' stomachs are so small that they can only consume so much. And that's the nice thing about adding fat into a diet, is you increase the caloric density without really increasing the dry matter intake. And so to have another, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Another fat source that, I didn't mention this earlier and I should have. So hemp seed oil, your hemp seeds are about 80% polyunsaturated fatty acids. Of that, we talk about the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Hemp seeds about 3 to 1. So much lower than, say, corn. Corn is like 50 to 1. It basically has no omega-3s. Soybean, I think, is somewhere around 20 to 1. And so it's a nice alternative to other fat sources that can provide a more balanced fatty acid ratio. Even though we don't technically have one defined in the horse, we do make some assumptions that somewhere closer to the 1-to-1 ratio is more ideal.
Okay. And what about the seed cake, right? Like what's left after you squeeze the oil out, right? And I think you were feeding the horses the oil, the hemp seed oil. Mm-hmm. You're left over with this crushed seed and kind of the raw inside of the seed. And a lot of people talked about that being called hemp seed cake or cake.
Or meal.
Or meal.
Meal's common reference.
Any hypotheses? I know you didn't test that with your horses, but is there any hypotheses as to what would be the benefits or concerns if you were to feed that also to the horses, or to instead of the hemp seed oil?
Absolutely. Yes, I did not feed my research horses, but I've gotten some product to feed to my own personal horse. It is high in protein, like we talked about. So it's still got that really beneficial protein profile. You can't get all of the fat out with just crushing and pressing it. So there's still, a decent residual amount of fat. I think that, again, I haven't had a true, profile to look at, but I would assume there would be a greater concern for the cannabinoid residual, since that is the material where you're going to have the cannabinoids sticking to directly. And then I think there could possibly also be, more of that, the terpenes, those volatile, molecules within there that give it that aroma. Because I know that I've fed it to my horse, but he's a little picky, and sometimes it took a couple of tries and then he kind of figured out like, oh, but they're a little skeptical. The horses have pretty particular palates. And so that was kind of the nice thing about the hemp seed oil and having no rejection. But I have heard many of anecdotal stories of people feeding the hemp seed meal. I think there's a company in Texas creating a horse feed product using hemp seed meal. And I think it's got a lot of potential.
Now, will that have to go through the same sort of testing that you're doing? I know you're doing it for different reasons as part of your PhD, but would they have to have it tested in a similar fashion?
So the restriction with animal feed products is at a national level, where we're looking for, AFCO approval and all of that FDA approval. many states have created their own, generally regarded as safe or grass approvals at the state level. And so if a company wanted to, so this company's in Texas, and Texas has a generous grass approval on hemp seed meal and oil to horses. And so they can create this feed, and as long as they're not going over state lines, they can produce it and sell it within the state of Texas. And at that point, it is up to the horse owner to be knowledgeable that there is a potential for cannabinoids. So if they're in any kind of show organization, that not only is there a federal restriction, there's also a restriction at some of the rated show levels. So if they're participating in anything like AQHA or US Equestrian Federation or anything like that, then they need to be weary of the fact that there could potentially be a contaminant.
So now we've got, I guess, even more confusion on the state by state level emerging, right? So around this whole thing, what would you say to, I know the governor of New York is, and I've got some business partners who are working on this right now as well. And the governor of New York is considering signing a bill that would, for all intents and purposes, I don't know if legalize is the right word, but maybe it is, legalize hemp seed as being feed for horses and for dogs, as part of what, is in her desk right now. And I think it's being held up because some of the folks, in her ag board are kind of concerned about what you've been researching. And, what would you say to them, those in New York? I mean, it's a real life situation, it's on the governor's table, and there's a lot of pressure and interest to move forward with this, because if you can legalize hemp seed as feed for horses, that provides another economic channel for farmers. And now all of a sudden you can get into the hemp stalks being used as plastics replacements and building materials replacements, and carbon negative building, and all this, some great things come as a result of hemp. But with the economics the way they are, you really got to have the feed be a part of the solution in order for the farmers to have the incentive to grow this stuff, because there's just not enough money there to go around. So given this real life scenario, New York, and if they're listening, anybody there that's concerned and trying to do the right thing here, but the bill's there to be signed. So what would you say to the governor of New York and those on her ag team that may be concerned?
Realistically, for the ones that are concerned, especially when we're talking at the government level, I still have to publish my work, but I think that there is a good amount of work out there in cannabinoids that they can assess for, safety studies. Since my dose of cannabinoids is much lower, and that's kind of the natural, I would probably ask them if they've got those concerns. I'd ask them, do they have the money? I can connect them to researchers, or we can do research, but do they have the money to fund it? Because it's really hard to generate those resources that, they're asking for this. But for a company to invest in this, that's hard if it's only at one state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's such a patchwork of approvals that you're not going to get your big companies probably to sponsor any work right now that's, for the better good of everyone, because they're not going to mass produce, because they'd have to try and jump through too many hoops to market their product. So yeah, I would say, there are a lot of states that put some stuff forward, but if there are concerns, do a safety analysis, and if you still have concerns, maybe consider releasing some special funding to answer those questions, because yes, the industrial hemp industry, I think, does need the horse market, the livestock market. We'll always produce enough, I think, for the human consumption side of things, where they have the hemp pulse or they're using the hemp seed oil, but to make an industry fluid, you have to find an outlet for the byproducts.
That's right. Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you again for all the work you've done. And I'll summarize one more time. Hempseed for horses increases the beneficial fatty acid GLA, does not increase any inflammatory fatty acids, and does not contaminate the blood of the horse with any cannabinoids whatsoever. Great work, Kristine Ely. And thank you so much for joining us today. Would love to keep track of your work and have you back again. With any new findings that you come up with. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.
Have a great day.
You too.
As always, this show is brought to you by packedwithlife.com, your source for functional mushrooms. Lots of great information there and links to awesome products that support natural healing, new neuron growth in your brain. Think about that for a second. Growing new neurons, probably a pretty important thing to do. Lowers inflammation and provides natural energy without caffeine. Just so many benefits to functional mushrooms like lion's mane, cordyceps, chaga, turkey tail, those sorts of functional mushrooms. So check it out now at packedwithlife.com.
Thanks for listening to Ashley on Nothing But the Truth for a Better You and Me.